All right, you guys, so this video will be my wrap up for February. I know it's a little late, but I explained it in my other video where I share my reflections on Black History Month, why I took my time. So now that I've had that out of the way, I am ready to speak about these books. So without further ado, join me and let's talk about it. All right, welcome to my channel. My name is Chilanda and this is Library Without Borders. Okay, you guys, so I read a total of 8 books. I mentioned that I already shared my thoughts on 4 of those books, including Toussaint L'Ouverture. Now, the books that I have not talked about are the following. Now, this book was a book pick by me for the book club, and it's River Sing Me Home by Eleanor Shearer. Yo, let's talk about this book, man. I cried. I actually wailed at some point, and I was alone. Threw myself on the wall. I was like, oh my god. So this story, we follow Rachel, and it is set during Emancipation 1834. Obviously, slavery has been abolished during that time, and Rachel, who lives on a plantation, is free. Now, the story of Rachel is that she sets herself on a journey to go find her children. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. As a mom, let me tell you that this story was triggering on every level. And when we shared our thoughts with the book club ladies, we all had like the same, I guess, feelings at the same moments. But there was a difference because being Black and then being white, there were still things that you knew we couldn't be at the same page, you know. But other than that, being moms, we understood a little bit of Rachel's journey. So let's talk about Rachel. So she decides that she needs to go find her children, and this is set in, I believe, is it Trinidad? So it's set first on Barbados, and her journey will take her to Barbados, British Guiana, Trinidad, and Jamaica. So obviously, the fact that emancipation has been proclaimed does not mean that those slaves living on those plantations are free. You know, it's never that easy. So Rachel decides to run. She runs for her life. The first place she goes to is a place where she will find her first daughter. But obviously her journey is fraught with danger, because as soon as she starts running, the overseer decides to go and search for her. But anyways, she will go onto this town where she will discover her first daughter. She's looking for 5 children, you know, those that survived, because she did lose some on the plantation. So the first one is Mary Grace. Mary Grace is mute. She doesn't speak. And she finds her at I think she's in a store where this Black couple is running the store, and they're into like sewing and things like that. So obviously the encounter is emotional. She sees Mary Grace, and Mary Grace is able to speak to her mom without speaking, by her, you know, expressions. And I mean, a mom just knows her daughter, and they're able to find each other, and you know, they hug it out. And the only thing is that while Rachel wants to take Mary Grace with her, she has to understand that Mary Grace has made a life over there. So she has to also speak to the Black couple. Do they want to leave her? Because she's working for them, you know what I mean? So, and one thing about Rachel's journey is that she doesn't know what freedom is really, because a lot of those people were so used to a certain life, so that once you were set free, where do you go? What do you do? What is freedom? You know what I mean? But then she tells her daughter that I'm searching for my other children. Are you gonna come? Are you gonna join me? The couple lets them go, and Mary Grace and Rachel embarks on the rest of the journey to find the other children. And on that journey, where is it that she found her second child? Thomas, her second boy. What I discover in this book is that I think they were called Maroons, but in this book, Eleanor calls them Bushmen. And the Bushmen were people who succeeded in running from the plantations and installing themselves in the depth of those forests where, you know, white people couldn't find them, and you had to travel a river and then go beyond, and that's where, you know, you would find them. And in those lands, they were the Indians that were there before, Amerindians, I don't know how to call them, but I'll put their names here. And obviously they were exterminated by white people. But then, yeah, you had those Bushmen, and that's where she found her son, Thomas. And Thomas, his story is that he found freedom among these people. And Rachel is like, you know, they reunite and they hug it out, like they're happy, they're crying, because this is unbelievable. I mean, this story, even though the author says it's based on facts, it has some fictional elements to it, because how likely are you to find like all your children alive as well? Like, come on. But anyways, they spend time together. She even builds a little hut there where they live, they sing, you know, all that good stuff. But then she tells Thomas that she can't stay there. Thomas is like angry. He's like, why can't you stay there? You don't even know where you're going. You don't even know if those other children are alive. And she's like, if I had thought like that, I wouldn't have come this far and find you. Right? Thomas is like, I'm staying. I'm not coming with you. And at the same time, Mary Grace, she meets this man. It's more like Rachel who met this man, and this man befriends Mary Grace. So it is them two together going on, so them three traveling together, and something develops between Mary Grace and the man. The man speaks, he's able to, you know, he's speaking, but obviously Mary Grace is mute. And I love that. I love the fact that they were able to find a relationship, like a love between them two, even though Mary Grace didn't speak, but her smile, her expression, he was able to understand, and that was a love language that was good with them. Anyways, long story short, they set sail for another location. They hear that their other kids have traveled, I think somewhere in, what was the land? I remember Demerara because of the book of Vanessa, Island Queen. As soon as I heard Demerara, I was like, yeah, that's around like Jamaica and all those places. But anyway, so they go there because she hears of the fact that her other daughters, her two daughters, have been sold onto a plantation or somewhere there. So she arrives there, and again, she talks to people there, asks questions and stuff like that. And she discovers, she discovers, she sees her daughter in a shop, like in a place, through the window, and she tries to speak to her, and the daughter hears her mom calling. Then she takes a look, she looks at Rachel, and then she turns around. Yo, do you know what it does to you? After so many years, you find your daughter, but then your daughter just almost doesn't acknowledge you. Yo, those were parts where you were like, oh my god, like this is hurting. But finally, that daughter goes to find her, and you discover her truth. And that's what I think the author tried to convey in this story, is that even though Rachel set on this journey to find her kids, it doesn't mean that her kids were gonna be like, okay mommy, let's go together, yay, you know what I mean? Like, they made lives for themselves. And this other daughter, her third daughter, comes, and she's very light-skinned. Literally, you guys, she can pass for white. As you may know, back then, women were raped. So obviously she had different shades of children, literally. Some dark, some brown, some who can pass for white, hence that daughter. So she tells herself that she met this man, and obviously he's white. And now she lives in the society where she has to pretend to be someone else, that, you know, someone else in order to survive. And that's one of the discussion we had among us book club ladies. We were like, in that time, I know when you look at it from this time, you're like, oh my gosh, like, you know, pretending to be white, we don't like that. But then people did what they had to do back then in order to survive. And she found that she could pass for white, and she wanted to live. And unfortunately, that's what happens. And you know what's gonna happen? Once she mates with that white person, she will dilute the blackness of her lineage. And unfortunately, Rachel had to come to terms with that. And that hurt as well, you guys. Like, as a mom, I'm just like, damn, like, that hurts, man. Like, this book was so emotional, y'all. Like, this is what I'm saying. I had to speak about all my emotions in the other videos so I can speak about this book without getting into my feelings, okay? But yeah, so then she asks her about her sister, because she's like, you know, it was the two of you that were sold onto the same plantation. What's going on? So she's like, the last time she saw, she was on another plantation, and that plantation is rumored to be oversaw by a very mean overseer. So Rachel wishes her daughter good luck, and that's it. That's the end of it. Like, you know, like that's it. She will never see Thomas. She will never see her other daughter. What was the name of this other daughter? Cherry Jane. Her name is with Cherry Jane. Before she meets her other daughter, you guys, I forgot to mention her other boy. His name is Micah. Yes, Micah. Oh my gosh, you guys, Micah. I don't want to spoil the story for you guys. Micah, his story was so sad. We cried. I cried. We cried and I cried. But anyways, I don't want to spoil that story, but you need to read that book. He really fought, and he was only 16 years old, and unfortunately she was not able to find him. But like I said, that's another story that I do not want to spoil for you. But anyways, let's go back to her journey to find the other sister, and that will be the last of her children that she will go and seek to find. And she goes on to that plantation, and in order for her to actually go and see her daughter, she has to basically not sell herself, but like she has to promise herself to be a slave to this overseer in order for them, her Mary Grace and her husband, to go onto the plantation and see her other daughter. And oh my gosh, you guys, she actually decides to go into servitude in order to go into the plantation and see her daughter. And boy, oh boy, the things she discovered, the brutality. Anyways, you guys, that's all I'm gonna say. But this book, River Sing Me Home, was a fantastic book. I highly recommend. And this book, I will rate it 4 out of 5. I enjoyed it very much. Then this book, The Secret Diaries of Charles Ignatius. I hope, because my husband put in that other video the pronunciation, I think it's Ignatius. So this story is very different actually. It's about, obviously, Charles. And Charles is born into slavery. And what the author said, which I found very interesting, is that this story, let me set the record straight, it's not fraught with porn trauma, because he says that a lot of people are very obsessed with slave narratives and porn trauma. It's like, that's not the story of this particular character. It wasn't really focused on slavery per se, but it had mention of slavery, because during that time you cannot avoid slavery. So we follow Charles. He's born onto a ship, obviously coming from the African continent. His parents are dead, and he is adopted by this white family. So this white man gives him, I think, a ring, a ruby or something like that. And he brings Charles to his sisters. Was it his sisters? Yeah, I think it was his sisters or daughters. And he is raised onto that land with those 2 sisters. So he grows up, he's about 11 years old. And why he's basically considered a pet. Literally, these 2 sisters will have parties at their home, and they would invite all these high-end society people, these gentlemen, gentle ladies, you know, back then, 1700s. That's when the story is set. And Charles would be there in order to entertain these lovely people. You know, they would find him very fascinating, the way he spoke, the way he was able to imitate, I think, certain characters back then, and they would just applaud him. So one day Charles decides to go onto, I don't know why he went, but he goes on a street and meets this white man, and this white man decides to take him on and educate him. And that's when his journey begins of being educated, and it will take him on many adventures, where he will also meet his future wife Jane. But before I get there, this man decides to educate him, but obviously the sisters are not for it, so he has to do it hiding. So he will go with the help of the servant and go see this man who decides to educate him, and a friendship will grow between them two. And Lord behold, Ignatius, Charles, becomes older, right? And he decides that he wants to go and move out of that place. He no longer wants to live with the sisters. He can't stay there. He no longer wants to become a pet. And by the way, you guys, I want to mention that the way the story is told is through the letters of Charles Ignatius. So he's basically speaking to his son, and he is telling through those letters to his son of his life. and where his life will bring him, and so on and so forth. And without telling too much of the story, what happens to Charles is that once he runs away from the sister's house, he will be followed by this slave catcher. You know those slave catcher? Oh my gosh, those are your nightmares. And he will have to hide and seek work. But unfortunately, in London during that time, who wants to give a job to a black man? And that's when he meets the parents of his future wife, Jane. I mean, this guy falls in love with Jane. So what happens is that once he will become friends with the father of Jane, he will be brought to a different part of London, you know, where there's black people, there's entertainment, something like where black people are able to dance, to laugh, which is something he's never seen. So the father accepts for them to start a friendship. But what happens is that Jane will be sent to Jamaica. I think it was Jamaica. And they will be away from each other, Charles and Jane, for 5 years. And that's why he's talking to his son about the way the love and relationship grew through those letters and through that long distance relationship. And Jane will share what was going on those plantations in Jamaica. I mean, the torture. You guys can just, I mean, I've talked about it so many times. Y'all can know what was going on in Jamaica in this, you know, with the slaves back then. And there's a story. And the reason why I mentioned the story, it's because it took a couple of pages where Jane talks about what happened to one of the children on that plantation. She was just a normal little girl who loved to play, very brilliant, very outspoken, very like funny. And unfortunately, Jane had captured the attention of one of those mean overseer, and he wanted to have her, but he couldn't have her because she was almost under the protection of the mistress and the master of that plantation. So he decides that in order, I guess, to avenge her or like get to her, he's gonna rape that little girl. And Jane unfortunately tries to go to the master and be like, yo, this is what he did, you know, they were witness and all that stuff. But unfortunately, the master and mistress says, no, we asked him, he said he couldn't do it, blah blah blah. And you see how Charles and Jane share emotions and how they are distraught by all of this. And 5 years is up, they come together, they get married, they live in London, and they have children. One of them does pass away. But during that period, while he was waiting for Jane, I must admit that this guy was going into bars. He was like getting drunk. He was, I guess, a typical young man. Like he was just living a life full of debauchery. You know what I mean? Simply because he wanted to work, but there was no work to be found. You know what I mean? And soon as he gets a life with Jane, he decides to go in entertainment because he's always loved that. Even though he was always entertaining the sisters, and back then he had a talent for it though. So he actually is able to go into theater. Back then it was white people who would, you know, wear a black mask and perform in front of people. But Charles was able to be black and perform in front of white people. And of course, the audience was never always nice, but he was able to win them over. And that's essentially the story of Charles Ignatius. It's his life, and the fact that he was just this black man that was able to also vote. That's the thing. He was able to vote when the slavery was being discussed and being abolished. He was able to be among the people to vote to abolish slavery. But before I conclude, I want to say this one thing. And I think I've noticed that in all the slave narratives, people had to do what they had to do to survive during that time. And even though a lot of the goods were being imported from those Caribbean lands where slaves were being killed and forced to amass those sugar and all that stuff, those cotton and all that stuff, back in London, he found himself in search of a job selling those goods that were coming from slavery. You know what I mean? So, and he knew that, but unfortunately he had to do what he had to do, right? So that's it, you guys. So this is, I'm not sure it's historical fiction. It is historical fiction, and the book was interesting. I will recommend it if you want to know the story of, you know, Charles Ignatius. And I'd rate this 3.5 out of 5. It was very interesting. And lastly, I want to talk to you briefly about this book, The History of African Art. Now, this book, I actually filmed a little video. I'm not sure that hubby will be able to show you the video, but how can I filmed the video because this book is basically the story of Africa through its arts. And this story goes back to like 13th century, 14th century. I mean, I'm only gonna focus about the sculptures found in Congo, and you know, because that's my country. And I want to say this, you guys, like I mentioned in my other video where I share my reflections, there is honor, there is beauty, there is something to be found in the African continent. Africa that we see today is not how it began. And this book sheds light on Africa during those times. How people from the world traveled all the way to Africa to learn the different textiles, the culture, the arts, building of those monuments, of those the big libraries, all of those things, and the people themselves. Africa had its own way of functioning. I just want to show you a little bit about Congo. These are arts that you can find in Congo. I just want to, I tabbed the whole book. Like, you guys need to really get into this. But it says, Luba thrones were often covered in a white cloth and imbued with powers of the ancestral and living ruler. The Luba, which I think I'm descended from, y'all. I know. The Luba, like the Asante and Congo, are a matrilineal group tracing rulership through women, the king's mother's lineage. Yo, when I discovered that, I'm like, this is why Congo is not, it's not, because we lost that matrilineal connection. You know, that's how it was done back in the days. Yo, it talked, I mean, you guys, I'm not even sure how I can talk to you about this book, but I promise you, it talked about Egypt and how Egypt was Nubian back then. You know, you see the coloring of Egyptian today, all of those people, that was not the color back then, just so you know. And there's another aspect I wanted to show you, I wanted to talk about. This is another sculpture found in Congo, and it says the human head at the top of the board references chiefs, important ancestors, and Boudier affiliates. And there's another aspect here. The powers gathered in this meeting proposed a deep division with notable impacts for both African people without their consent and their colonizers. British Nigeria artist Yinka Soni Bare imagined the scene as a sculptural rendering featuring diversely attired Europeans seated around a large table in animated discussion about the map of Africa on the table's surface, each part demarcated by a different hue. Europeans here were only concerned about their own benefits from such a division, oblivious to further harm perpetuated on African peoples and their institutions. This book goes into depth on the African continent, about Ethiopia, about Congo, about Benin, Nigeria. Look at these sculptures. Those are in Africa, y'all. These buildings. This is an art. Biko, y'all know, I don't know if you guys heard about Biko. He was a freedom fighter. I think, was he South African? Yeah, South African. He was an apartheid activist in South Africa. There's also, this is like contemporary art. And this image talks about the memoir assemblage. Image draws our attention to an earlier period of richness in industry, now silenced, and a deeply contested terrain in the predatory global capitalistic drivers that succeeded exploitative colonial era practices, both negatively impacting livability, sustainability, and well-being. Anyways, you guys, so that's the history of African art. I learned so much in this book, and I can tell you today, the way I walk with my head literally my nose in the cloud is just to tell you that what the world is showing us about Africa is not what Africa used to be. We will never go back to what Africa used to be, but I find that when you know your history, it gives you, a certainty about who you are, where you came from, And you know that today's world, it is the consequences of what the Western world took from the African continent, what they were able to destroy and able to sell us today. But once, like I said, once you know that history, you cannot undo, you cannot unlearn all of that. And I mean, this is for Africa, literally Africa. Anyways, you guys, that's it. So as I said, I read a total of 8 books. So I read all these books, including Toussaint Louverture, which I listened on Audible. So a total of 8 books. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Voila. Yeah, February was really hard, was really rough. I'm gonna end this video here. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you will pick up some of these books if you haven't. But if you have, let me know what you thought of these books, and you know, let's partake and share in the comment section. On this note, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share, and I will see you in my next video. Ciao.